Hello everyone, Silva here and welcome to my Fred tutorial series Advanced Part 1. First of all, sorry for the long delay since my last video. There have been some unforeseen consequences due to a lack of quality control at the manufacturer of my new desk, and that caused this forced break for me in making videos. But now I have solved the problem for the moment, and I can continue with those videos that I already announced to you a while back. This first part of this series is about a topic that I talked about several times already during the regular Fred tutorial series. It is about variables and how to use them in Fred to create more dynamic opportunities when scripting the events. So first question is then, what are variables in Fred? Well, basically the same as in every other programming language. Variables contain a single value, a number or a short text, a string, that can be used in sexps in the events editor or in any other editor that uses sexps to control and store information. I will present you 3 examples how to use variables in this context. The first one is a basic counting example. In my scenario for this example, the player is tasked to protect 3 cargo containers, and if those containers get destroyed, then command shall comment on this destruction with an appropriate message. And as you can imagine, depending on how many of those containers are already destroyed, this message shall change. The simple approach would be to create a message for each container and then play that message when that particular container gets destroyed. But as I said, I want those messages to reflect the number of containers that already have been destroyed, and so I cannot use that simple approach. How to solve this problem? Well, create a number variable that counts the number of containers that have been destroyed. Then you have to create events for the destruction of each of those 3 containers, and in the action parts of those sexps you have to use the modify variable expression to change the value of my variable number of destroyed containers. At the start of the mission, that variable has the value 0, so no containers destroyed yet. And in every event, when one of those containers get destroyed, the variable value is increased by 1. There are appropriate sexps for those kinds of calculations in the arithmetic category. So what you can see here are those 3 events for the destruction of the containers that increase the value of our variable. Now we need some events that react on our variable. In this scenario it's quite easy. We can use the equals operator to create events that react on specific values of our variables. So we need one for 1 container destroyed, one event for 2 containers destroyed, and a third one for 3 containers destroyed. Once we have those events, we can then play the appropriate messages for 1, 2, or 3 containers destroyed as soon as the variable has the appropriate values for that. As you can see, a quite simple and straightforward example on how to use variables to create a more dynamic flow for your events. In our second example, we will use our variables to react on certain timed events. In the first mission of my campaign, the player is tasked with patrolling a set of waypoints, and at each waypoint they have to wait for a few seconds till a scan is complete and then go on to the next one, rinse and repeat. Here we want to use variables to calculate time between arriving at a waypoint and the time when the scan is complete and the player can move on to the next waypoint. Once again, we use a number variable here because time in Fred is always counted in number of seconds since beginning of the mission. So how do we do this? Well, we create events that react on the distance between our player ship and our waypoints. As soon as the player is close enough to one of our waypoints, this event sets the variable to the current mission time, which is, as I said, the number of seconds since start of the mission. Then we have another event that listens on the time and compares it to that value of the variable plus 10 seconds. As soon as that value is reached, the event then sends the message to the player that they can move on to the next waypoint. And by using chained directive events, we can ensure that the player moves through our waypoint path in the correct order. The third example is something that I already mentioned before in some of my previous videos: the usage of variables to control the supply situation for the player over the course of a campaign. For this example, we want to set the number of ships available to the player. So the very first thing we have to change here is that we do not want to have a variable that is only applicable for one mission, but a variable that is carried on through multiple missions. So when we create our variable, we have to set one of several options here. We can set our variables to either be saved on mission close or on mission complete, or we can set it to eternal. A variable that is set to be saved on mission complete will be saved as soon as the player hits the accept button and moves on to the next mission in the campaign. If they repeat the mission, for example because it was a failure or because they were not satisfied with its outcome, then the variable is not saved and will be reset to its last value or its default value. That is different for a variable that is set to be saved on mission close. That happens as soon as the player ship leaves the mission, no matter the outcome of the mission and whether or not the player chooses to accept to go on to the next mission. Those two types of variables will be saved in the context of the current campaign. So if the player chooses another campaign, those variables and their contents do not matter anymore. That is different for eternal variables, which are saved in the player profile and can be used and changed throughout multiple campaigns. That could be interesting for mods that contain several campaigns to exchange information between those campaigns. But for our current example, we want a variable that is only relevant for the current campaign, so we can select the save on mission complete option here because that makes sense for our example. We have to create variables for each and every ship type that we want to control that way, and as their default values in the first mission, we have to set the value that they have at the beginning of our campaign. And for every mission that shall use those variables, we have to create them with the very same name and also important, the same persistence setting, so that the engine can recognize that this is in fact the variable that has been used previously and can fill in the correct values. If we choose another name or use a different persistence setting, then the variable will start with its default value. Next, we have to create events that change our variable value. So whenever a ship of a certain type is destroyed, that variable value shall be reduced by 1. Depending on how many different ship types you have that you want to control with this system and how many ships you have in your missions, that can get quite complicated because you have to create your events to consider which ship type a ship actually is in the current mission, because if you have the opportunity to select the ships at the start of the mission, that might not be the same ship type that you threaded the mission with. And then you have to select the correct variable to change to reflect the number of remaining ships for that particular ship type. In other words, if you have many ship types and ship choice at the start of your missions and a lot of ships in your missions, then you will be in a lot of work to really create a realistic system that controls the number of ships available over the course of your campaign. But if you want to do this, you can then go to your next mission, create the variable with the same name and use it in the ship loadout selection to control the number of available ships for that given type by that variable. And those were my 3 more or less simple examples on how to use variables in Fred. I hope you learned something from that. Please stay tuned for the next video in my Fred Advanced Tutorial series. Thank you for watching. See you again in one of my other videos if you like to. Until then, take care and goodbye.